understand it, and it's not something simplistic that we can just memorize and use as a rule to live by. And I don't think Jesus meant for his teachings to be simple, to give us pat answers. Instead, he calls for us to look at things for ourselves and from a different viewpoint. We are not to be the winners, the powerful with all the right answers, looking outside or down at our sisters and brothers. I believe that Jesus invites us to wrestle with answers, to look for the unexpected, to side with those on the outside. And we saw that kind of upside-down wisdom at Wild Goose Festival. For those of you who aren't quite sure what the festival is all about, I'm going to insert here what happens there. The motto is Progressive Christianity at the intersection of spirituality, art, music, and justice. People camp at Hot Springs, North Carolina for 4 days, share meals and stories, listen to preachers and musicians. I remember a UCC rapper who's the pastor of Trinity UCC in Chicago, Amy Grant, pop-up singers with guitars in different little stations around. There are roundtables with discussions with authors, activists, and theologians, boosted by pottery or fabric or books, a youth pavilion where leaders address things as diverse as mental health, body images, spirituality through art, and teen questions about relationships and sex. You can hike a piece of the Appalachian Trail or tube down the French Broad River to experience God in creation, or go to a tent and hear evangelical turned radical Jesus follower Shane Claiborne talk about faith and gun control. In other words, it's 4 days of trying to understand and practice the upside-down wisdom of Jesus. Now I want us to hear from the others who experienced the Wild Goose Festival. It'll be Shay, Graham, Carlin, and Sam.
So one of the workshops that I went to was a pastor who ministers to detainees at a detention center in Georgia. And so what they did, her and a couple of her friends read letters from some of the women in that detention center. And the stories were just heart-wrenching, as you can imagine. But there was also glimmers of hope and gratitude that these women shared. But what most felt like upside-down wisdom to me, since that's the theme, was that the pastor, when she was talking about these women and talking about her experience, she wasn't talking about saving them, she was talking about serving them. And it was just such an example of what Jesus did and what he asks us to do.
Thanks, Shay.
My favorite part about Wild Goose was the youth tent. It was a very diverse place of people from all backgrounds, and most of their stories involved being kicked out or discriminated against in their respective churches for their life choices and what they did. And everyone was welcome in that tent, and no one was discriminated against.
Thanks, Graham.
Speaking of different backgrounds, so I was also at that Alcoholics Anonymous for ex-evangelicals with Shay and Sam, so I didn't have a lot to bring to the table for that, but it was interesting because afterwards Sam said to me, like, I'm sorry, I don't think you could have related to a lot of that, but I said that for me it was more important to listen and to learn from that experience, and I think that was a big part of Wild Goose for me, because I'm a person that always wants to be putting things out into the world, but I have the example of such amazing leaders and such amazing powerfulness in the soft moments that I think that was the best part, listening to everyone like Shay Claiborne talk about gun control in a way that was so passionate that like I'd never seen that before, that passionate aspect brought to politics, and then just like the female example that was brought to us in light of a lot of our scriptures today that are talking about a female God, and in Desiree, Shay, and Tonya that weekend was really incredible, and I'm really thankful for all the youth leaders that set a great example for me and all the other youth.
So kind of in theme with when Jesus entered the scene and ticked off a lot of the entrenched religious leaders because they did not like his unconventional wisdom. One of my favorite sessions was a woman named Jen Hatmaker, who is kind of she was a poster child for evangelicals for decades. She had been a part of the church and preaching and writing books for 20 years. And about 2 years ago, she and her husband put out a statement and said, we can no longer justify leaving out the LGBTQ plus community. It doesn't mesh with the God that we know. It doesn't mesh with what we've learned in studies. We need to accept everyone as they are. And immediately the backlash was horrific for the entire family, including people burning her books and sending them to her in the mail. Christian stores pulled all of her books off of the shelves, and her children were pulled aside in public and told that their parents were horrible people. But as a part of that same talk, she also gave kind of a letter of an emboldened plea for forgiveness from the LGBTQ plus community, asking for forgiveness. And so seeing kind of the flip side of that with snap judgment from her base that she had served for 20 years, and then this group of people that surrounded her and loved her out of forgiveness was beautiful, very mindful of Jesus and his unconventional wisdom.